On May 4th, 1975, a baby girl named Lassie Denise Rocha was born, destined to become part of a story that would capture the attention of millions. Lassie grew up in Modesto, California, a place where she met a man named Scott Peterson. They quickly became the perfect couple. Lassie, a cheerful and warm-hearted woman, and Scott, her charming, smooth-talking husband. In 2002, Lassie was 8 months pregnant with their first child, a son they had already named Connor. But on December 24th, 2002, everything would change forever. Lassie was suddenly reported missing by Scott. He claimed that he had gone fishing at a nearby lake that morning, and when he returned, Lassie was nowhere to be found. What seemed like a simple case of a missing person soon became much more suspicious. The police, at first, thought Lassie might have been the victim of a random abduction. But as time passed, more questions arose about Scott's involvement. Just months later, in April 2003, a chilling discovery was made on the shores of San Francisco Bay. The bodies of Lassie and her unborn son, Connor, were found washed up on the beach. The reality of this tragedy struck hard. Lassie's life had been violently taken, and Connor, too, was lost before he ever had the chance to live. The evidence surrounding their deaths was troubling, and it wasn't long before the focus shifted squarely to Scott Peterson. Scott's calm demeanor and odd behavior during the investigation raised more and more red flags. Despite his denials, the authorities were growing more convinced that Scott was involved in his wife's death. After a thorough investigation, Scott Peterson was arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder: the first-degree murder of Lassie and the second-degree murder of Connor. In 2004, the trial began, and the world watched closely as the details of the case unfolded. The prosecution painted Scott as a man who murdered his wife to be with another woman, while the defense insisted on his innocence. But in the end, the jury found Scott guilty. He was sentenced to death for Lassie's murder and second-degree murder for Connor's. However, the case didn't end there. The public's fascination with the case continued, with many questioning the fairness of Scott's trial and the media's portrayal of him. In 2020, Scott's death sentence was overturned, and he was later resentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the story didn't fade away. In 2024, a new twist emerged. The LA Innocence Project, an organization that investigates wrongful convictions, claimed they had new evidence that could prove Scott Peterson's innocence. This shocking development caused many to wonder, could Scott Peterson be the victim of a terrible injustice? The story of Lassie Peterson's murder remains one of the most talked about cases in America, full of mystery, unanswered questions, and heartbreak. But as we dive deeper into this case, we'll unravel the layers of deception, doubt, and emotion that still surround it today. The early life and marriage of Lassie and Scott Peterson. Lassie Denise Rocha was born on May 4th, 1975, in the small town of Escalon, California. She was the youngest of 2 children, growing up with her older brother Brent. Lassie's parents, Sharon and Dennis, were high school sweethearts who later divorced, leaving Lassie and her brother to live with their mother in Modesto. While life wasn't always easy, Lassie's charm and positive attitude kept her spirits high. She worked on the family's dairy farm and bonded with her mother over gardening, shaping the strong, caring woman she would become. Lacey was a natural cheerleader, both in spirit and in life. She excelled in school, and after graduating from Thomas Downey High School, went on to California Polytechnic State University to study ornamental horticulture. It was here, while pursuing her dreams, that she met Scott Peterson. Scott was born on October 24th, 1972, in San Diego, California. His family had a different dynamic, with a father who owned a crate packaging company and a mother who ran a boutique. Scott grew up in a busy household with 5 half-siblings. From a young age, Scott was known for his skill in golf, eventually competing with future golf legends like Phil Mickelson. He had dreams of going pro, but life had other plans. After high school, Scott attended Arizona State University on a partial golf scholarship, but things didn't go as planned. His rivalry with Mickelson and a few personal mistakes led him to transfer schools and, eventually, settle at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo. There, he majored in agricultural business and became a model student, earning high praise from his professors. It was at Cal Poly where fate introduced Scott to Lacey. While working at a local cafe, Scott met Lacey, who would often visit the restaurant. In 1994, Lacey sent Scott her phone number, a simple gesture that would change both their lives forever. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and soon they were inseparable. The couple's relationship blossomed quickly. They moved in together, and in 1997, after Lacey graduated, they married at a beautiful resort. They seemed like the perfect couple, young, ambitious, and in love. But behind the scenes, cracks began to form in their marriage. In fact, just after their wedding, Scott was rumored to have started his first extramarital affair, a fact that would later come to light during the investigation into Lacey's death. The couple's life seemed idyllic on the surface. They opened a sports bar in San Luis Obispo, and in 2000, they purchased their first home in Modesto, where they planned to settle down and start a family. Lacey, now a substitute teacher, poured herself into making their house a home. She was the perfect housewife, loving cooking, entertaining, and following Martha Stewart's advice to the letter. In 2002, the couple received the best news of their lives. Lacey was pregnant with their first child. They were thrilled, and they had already chosen a name for their son, Connor. Their future seemed bright, full of hope, and filled with joy. But what the outside world didn't know was that Scott had begun a secret relationship with Amber Frey, a massage therapist he met in November of that year. As Lacey's due date approached, the cracks in Scott's seemingly perfect life began to widen. Little did anyone know the twisted secrets Scott was hiding would soon unravel in the most horrifying way: the disappearance of Lacey Peterson. It was the morning of December the 24th, 2002, when everything started to unravel. The day began like any other for the Petersons. Scott and Lacey had spent the previous evening together, enjoying a quiet night before the holidays. Around 5:45 p.m. on December 23rd, Lacey and Scott visited Lacey's sister, Amy Rocha, at her workplace, Salon Salon. Amy gave Scott his monthly haircut, and Scott offered to pick up a fruit basket for her before heading out to play golf the next day. Lacey, in high spirits, had a quick chat with her family before the evening ended. That night, Lacey spoke to her mother, Sharon, around 8:30 p.m. The conversation was normal, filled with casual details about Lacey's plans for the next day. It was the last time anyone would hear from Lacey before she vanished. The following morning, Scott claimed he left their home around 9:30 a.m. to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina. According to Scott, Lacey was at home watching a Martha Stewart show about meringue, preparing to mop the floor, bake cookies, and take their golden retriever, Mackenzie, for a walk in the nearby park. But something wasn't right. Around 10:30 a.m., a neighbor, Karen Service, found Mackenzie wandering alone outside the Peterson home. She returned the dog to their backyard. Another neighbor, Mike Chiavetta, also saw Mackenzie a little later that morning, still unattended. The dog's odd behavior was an early sign that something was amiss. By 2:15 p.m., Scott left a message for Lassie saying, "Hey, beautiful, it's 2:15. I'm leaving Berkeley." When he returned home that afternoon, Scott claimed to find the house empty, with Lacey nowhere to be found. Though her car was still parked in the driveway, the golden retriever, Mackenzie, was in the backyard. Scott said he immediately contacted Lacey's mother, Sharon, to ask if she had seen Lacey, as he began to realize his wife was missing. It was at this point that Lacey's family and friends began to gather at the Peterson home, and the panic set in. Scott claimed he had been golfing that day and had tried calling Lacey, but when he made the phone call to Sharon, it was clear that something was wrong. Lassie had never just disappeared without a word, especially not while so close to giving birth. As evening approached, the Modesto police were contacted and an official report was filed. Lassie, 7.5 months pregnant, was missing. The news quickly spread, and the story of Lacey's disappearance gripped the nation. Friends and family feared the worst. The next day, a full-scale search began. Over 900 people, including family, friends, neighbors, and volunteers, combed the area, posting missing person flyers and searching the neighborhood. The police launched an investigation, and detectives quickly became suspicious. Lassie's disappearance didn't sit right with them. The calmness in Scott's demeanor and his strange behavior raised red flags. Despite initially not considering the case suspicious, detectives soon realized there were signs of foul play. Scott, for his part, had already begun to act strangely. He seemed unemotional, distant, and more concerned with keeping up appearances than finding his wife. It was a combination of arrogance and indifference that struck the detectives as off. They couldn't shake the feeling that Scott knew more than he was letting on. As the search efforts intensified, the media's attention grew. A reward for Lacey's safe return was offered, which quickly increased from $25,000 to $500,000. The community rallied around Lacey's family, but the police were honing in on Scott. Every action, every word, was being scrutinized. In our next episode, we'll explore the mounting evidence, the twists and turns of the investigation, and the shocking revelations that followed Lacey's disappearance. Was Scott Peterson hiding something? The investigation would soon take a dark turn, and the truth would begin to surface. Stay tuned for more. The discovery of the affair and the bodies. The investigation into Lacey Peterson's disappearance had taken an unexpected turn. What started as a missing persons case soon revealed a web of secrets that would shake the foundation of everything people thought they knew about Scott Peterson. As the days went by, the media frenzy surrounding Lacey's disappearance intensified, and tips started rolling in from all over the country. But it wasn't until December 30th, 2002, that a crucial piece of the puzzle fell into place. A woman named Amber Frey came forward to the authorities. claiming to have been in a relationship with Scott Peterson. Amber told detectives that she had met Scott on November the 20th, 2002, and that Scott had told her he was single. Then, in a shocking twist, Amber revealed that on December 9th, Scott had told her he was a widower. His wife had allegedly died in a car accident, and this Christmas would be his first without her. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. The dates were chilling. Scott had been seeing Amber during the same time that Lacey had vanished, and now it seemed clear to detectives that Scott may have already been planning something sinister long before Lacey disappeared. Detectives quickly realized that the affair wasn't just a secret. It might have been a motive for something far darker. They gave Amber a device to record her conversations with Scott in hopes that it would reveal more. On January 15th, 2003, Lacey's family was informed of Scott's affair. The news rocked them to their core. Sharon Rocha, Lacey's mother, was devastated, and she didn't hold back. She immediately told detectives she believed Scott was involved in Lacey's disappearance, and possibly even her murder. Lacey's family, who had once rallied behind Scott, now felt betrayed and angered. They could no longer support him, especially after learning about his lies and deception. On January 24th, Lacey's family held a press conference where Brent Rocha, Lacey's brother, openly spoke about the affair. He revealed that Scott had confessed to having a relationship with a woman from Fresno. That same day, Amber Frey held her own press conference, explaining her role in the investigation. It was a stunning moment that added another layer of complexity to a case already filled with mystery. Then, on April 13th, 2003, everything changed. Two people out walking their dog in Richmond, California, stumbled upon something horrifying. They found the body of a male fetus on a tidal flat along the San Francisco Bay. The following day, a jogger discovered a human torso just a mile away from the fetus. The body parts found in the bay were later confirmed through DNA testing to be Lacey and her unborn son, Connor. The discovery of the bodies sent the investigation into full throttle. The case had gone from a missing persons case to a full-fledged homicide investigation. Forensic analysis revealed chilling details about the state of the bodies. Lacey's body was severely decomposed, bloated, and missing several body parts, including her head, arms, and most of her legs. Her organs had been washed away by the seawater, and forensic experts determined that Connor had died in utero. The circumstances surrounding their deaths were both mysterious and unsettling, leaving investigators with more questions than answers. The autopsy revealed additional disturbing details. Lacey had 2 cracked ribs, and her uterus and cervix were intact, though her body showed signs of prolonged exposure to the water. Connor, her unborn son, had been expelled from her body during decomposition. His body was found with signs of mutilation and a nylon cord wrapped around it, an eerie and unexplained detail that would later become part of the case's central mystery. The investigation grew more intense as detectives zeroed in on Scott. They found crucial pieces of evidence, including a hair wrapped around a pair of pliers in Scott's fishing boat that matched Lacey's hair. Police also discovered a homemade concrete anchor in Scott's boat, purchased just 2 weeks before Lacey's disappearance. When they searched Scott's warehouse, they found cement powder, a sledgehammer, and a dustpan, all potentially linked to the crime. Prosecutors speculated that Scott had used the concrete to weigh down Lacey's body, tying it to the anchors before sinking her in the bay. Meanwhile, Scott's behavior became increasingly erratic. Detectives tracked him with a GPS device, suspecting he might flee to Mexico. However, they discovered he had switched vehicles, foiling their attempt to catch him before he could escape. But the evidence was mounting, and Scott was rapidly becoming the prime suspect in the brutal murder of his wife and unborn child. In the next episode, we'll dive into the moment that everything came to a head. As more evidence surfaced, Scott's life would come crashing down, leading to a dramatic arrest and a trial that would capture the nation's attention. Stay tuned to find out how this chilling case would unfold. The arrest, trial, and sentencing of Scott Peterson. The investigation into Laci Peterson's disappearance had reached a boiling point, and the mounting evidence against her husband, Scott Peterson, was undeniable. As the case became increasingly sensational, the nation watched in horror and fascination as Scott's fate hung in the balance, arrest and arraignment. On April 18, 2003, the Modesto Police Department made the arrest that would change everything. Scott Peterson was taken into custody and charged with 2 counts of murder, the first-degree murder of his wife, Laci, and the second-degree murder of their unborn son, Connor. The arrest came after months of intense scrutiny, with detectives piecing together evidence that pointed directly to Scott, from his extramarital affair to the gruesome discovery of Laci and Connor's bodies in San Francisco Bay. It was clear that Scott's involvement in the crime was the key to unraveling the mystery. The arrest sent shockwaves through the media and public, with many already assuming his guilt. Scott was arraigned shortly after his arrest, and he pled not guilty to the charges. As he appeared in court, it was evident that the case would be one of the most high-profile trials in recent history. The trial began in 2004, and from the moment the jury was selected, the eyes of the world were on the courtroom. Prosecutors and defense attorneys alike knew the stakes were high. The prosecution's case was built on the idea that Scott Peterson had methodically planned and executed the murder of his wife and unborn child. They highlighted his extramarital affair with Amber Frey, the strange and suspicious behavior after Laci's disappearance, and the disturbing forensic evidence found during the investigation. The defense, on the other hand, argued that there was no direct evidence linking Scott to the crime. They suggested that Scott was an innocent man who had been wrongly accused due to circumstantial evidence and public opinion. They also pointed to the lack of a clear motive for the murder, arguing that Scott was simply a man who made a terrible mistake in his personal life. Opening statements. In his opening statement, Prosecutor Rick DiStasso painted a vivid picture of a man who had everything: a beautiful wife, a baby on the way, and a seemingly perfect life, but chose to betray it all. He argued that Scott's affair with Amber Frey was a key part of his motive to kill Laci, suggesting that Scott wanted to free himself from his marriage and start anew. The prosecution also focused on the shocking discovery of Laci and Connor's bodies in the bay, using forensic evidence to argue that Scott had deliberately tried to cover up his crime. In contrast, defense attorney Mark Geragos opened by questioning the evidence against Scott. He claimed that the prosecution had no definitive proof that Scott had killed his wife. Geragos painted a picture of a man who had been devastated by the loss of his wife and was wrongly accused due to media pressure and public opinion. The evidence. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence over the course of the trial. They introduced forensic evidence, such as the hair found on the pliers in Scott's boat and the concrete anchor that was allegedly used to weigh down Lacey's body. They also pointed to Scott's suspicious behavior, including his lack of emotion when Lacey was reported missing, and his refusal to cooperate with authorities. The defense, however, countered by questioning the validity of some of the forensic evidence and suggesting that the investigation was flawed. They also argued that the affair with Amber Frey was irrelevant to the actual crime and that there was no clear proof linking Scott to the deaths of his wife and child. The verdict. After weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. On November 12, 2004, after nearly 8 days of deliberations, the jury returned with their verdict. Scott Peterson was found guilty of 2 counts of murder: first-degree murder for the death of Lacey and second-degree murder for the death of their unborn son, Connor. The guilty verdict was met with both relief and anger. Many believed that justice had been served, but others felt that Scott had been unfairly convicted based on circumstantial evidence and the media's portrayal of him as a villain. Sentencing. In December 2004, Scott Peterson was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The sentencing hearing was emotional, with family members from both sides of the case speaking out. Lacey's family expressed their grief and anger, while Scott's family remained supportive, with his father and stepmother giving heartfelt statements in his defense. Scott was taken to San Quentin State Prison in California, where he would remain on death row for the foreseeable future. His case, however, would not be over. Over the years, appeals would be filed, and the media would continue to follow his story, questioning whether Scott Peterson was truly guilty of the heinous crimes for which he was convicted. As the episode ends, viewers are left to ponder the chilling details of the case. Was Scott Peterson a cold-blooded murderer who got away with his crime for months? Or was he a man who became a victim of circumstance, caught in a web of lies and betrayal? The debate over Scott's guilt or innocence would continue to rage for years to come.